Hello everyone, I'm Jun Wei, and today I am honored to represent our team to share our research on emergency evacuation in virtual reality. Our paper is titled Follow the Signs or the Crowd. Effects of environmental load and crowd dynamics in VR evacuation in real-world emergencies. Individuals face immense time pressure and must reconcile environmental affordances with social cues. However, it is difficult to control these variables in the physical world. Therefore, we leverage VR to conduct a strictly controlled experiment to explore, when sensory load and social pressure vary, do people follow the signs or do they follow the crowd? During a real fire evacuation, evacuees must navigate through smoke and noise while constantly monitoring the movement of the crowd around them. Immersive VR offers an excellent solution by providing an ethically and physically safe testbed. However, there is a significant gap in the current literature. Most prior studies tend to strengthen either sensory fidelity alone or social pressure alone. This makes it difficult to disentangle the causal roles of sensory versus social information and identical geometric constraints. Our research aims to address this exact gap. To address this, we formulated 3 core research questions. First, under equal geometry. How do crowd dynamics, specifically orderly versus chaotic flows, affect evacuation performance? Second, how does environmental load, such as multisensory complexity, alter the subjective experience and subsequently the performance of the evacuee? And third, do these 2 factors interact? Specifically, we wanted to know if a high environmental load amplifies the detrimental effects of a chaotic crowd, especially when guidance cues conflict. To address this, we formulated 3 core research questions. First, under equal geometry. How do crowd dynamics, specifically orderly versus chaotic flows, affect evacuation performance? Second, how does environmental load, such as multisensory complexity, alter the subjective experience and subsequently the performance of the evacuee? And third, do these 2 factors interact? Specifically, we wanted to know if a high environmental load amplifies the detrimental effects of a chaotic crowd, especially when guidance cues conflict. Let's look at the specific manipulations. In the high environmental load condition, we aggregated visual and acoustic complexity using dense props, dynamic lighting, volumetric smoke, a heat haze, and spatialized multi-source audio including alarms and crowd shouts. The low condition featured simplified textures, confined smoke, and alarm-only audio for crowd dynamics. The orderly condition featured 30 avatars queuing with 0.5 meter spacing and following the designated route. Conversely, the chaotic condition featured agents exhibiting random accelerations, abrupt turns, and light pushing, which induced local congestion and social pressure. A central component of our design was introducing a controlled conflict between cues as participants navigated the uniquely signed main corridor. They passed point B, triggering a spatialized voice prompt that stated, "You have run in the wrong direction. The exit is behind you." At this exact moment, the voice prompt directly contradicted the illuminated physical exit signs. We observe how participants responded to this conflict, whether they paused, looked back, or changed direction, allowing us to test if they follow the signs or the crowd as sensory load and social pressure vary.
Safe VR, Social and Ambient Factors in Evacuation VR, is a controlled virtual reality testbed for examining evacuation behavior under a fixed building geometry. Safe VR is designed to hold the architectural layout, spawn location, signage, controls, and movement speeds constant, while varying 2 independent factors: environmental load, low versus high multisensory complexity, and crowd dynamics, orderly versus chaotic. By crossing these factors, we obtain 4 scene versions that are directly comparable within the same office fire scenario. Safe VR situates participants in a single-floor, open-plan office with visible fire and smoke, illuminated exit signage, and public address audio. Participants navigate with thumbstick-based smooth locomotion and smooth turning. Teleportation is disabled to ensure consistent locomotor demands. Participants begin at a fixed spawn point, referred to as Point A. The designated evacuation path proceeds along the perimeter corridor, passing shared areas, and terminates at the emergency exit labeled Point C. The task is straightforward. Reach exit C. Participants are asked to make independent decisions on route selection. SafeVR includes a standardized, spatialized voice cue presented mid-route at a checkpoint labeled Point B, approximately 5 meters from the spawn. The cue states, "You have run in the wrong direction. The exit is behind you." This placement establishes a controlled conflict with the visual guidance provided by exit signage at that moment.
You have run in the wrong direction. The exit is behind you. You have run in the wrong direction. The exit is behind you.
We define 4 versions by crossing environmental load with crowd dynamics under the same geometry, spawn, and signage. 1. High environmental load and chaotic crowd dynamics. SafeVR renders dense, small props and high-detail materials, dynamic lighting and shadows, volumetric smoke, together with multiple spatialized sound sources, such as alarms, fire, and crowd noise. Pedestrian agents exhibit heading noise, bursty accelerations, light jostling, and stop-and-go waves that produce localized congestion. 2. High environmental load and orderly crowd dynamics. SafeVR preserves the high-load visual and auditory complexity while agents maintain coherent flow, cueing at a consistent interpersonal spacing and generally aligning with posted signage. 3. Low environmental load and orderly crowd dynamics. SafeVR simplifies textures and reduces small decorations and furniture while preserving major furnishings, gets rid of volumetric fog that spans across the whole setting, and limits audio to the alarm tone. Agents maintain orderly, signage-consistent flow. 4. Low environmental load and chaotic crowd dynamics. SafeVR retains the low-load sensory settings, while agents display intermittent speed changes and heading perturbations that introduce near contacts and local slowdowns.
Moving to our results, we assessed subjective experience using the NASA TLX and IPQ questionnaires. We found that high multisensory environmental load consistently increased perceived workload, specifically effort and frustration, regardless of crowd structure for presence. Higher load and orderly flow were associated with stronger general presence. Interestingly, temporal demand showed a crossed interaction, and a high load, orderly crowds elicited higher temporal demand than chaotic ones, whereas under low load, the pattern reversed. This suggests that clear, orderly flow in high-fidelity scenes provides strong pacing cues that make people feel more time-pressured. Regarding objective evacuation performance, both environmental load and crowd dynamics significantly delayed egress time, with the high chaotic condition performing the worst overall. The effects of these 2 factors were additive, meaning they stacked on top of each other. Through video coding, we pinpointed the mechanisms. Higher multisensory load impaired perception, leading to significantly more collisions with objects. On the other hand, flow coherence, or crowd dynamics, was the dominant determinant of route fidelity. Chaotic crowds directly caused more route deviations and human-to-human collisions. Our qualitative interviews and behavioral coding contextualize these numbers. We observed a consistent pattern aligned with reliability-weighted queuing. Many participants initially employed a science-first strategy. However, as the intelligibility of the environment degraded due to smoke or noise, participants rationally shifted their decision weight towards social cues, following the crowd. The danger is that when the crowd itself is chaotic, relying on social cues amplifies noise rather than corrects it, pulling participants off the optimal corridor, as seen in these first-person captures. These findings offer critical takeaways for designing immersive safety training. We identified dual mechanisms of egress, a capacity pathway driven by multisensory load, and a coordination pathway driven by crowd structure. Crucially, higher presence did not automatically improve performance. This highlights that immersion is a double-edged sword. High-fidelity sensory cues enhance the feeling of being there, but can overwhelm cognitive capacity. We advocate for performance-first fidelity. VR developers should prioritize preserving the clarity of guidance cues and shape coherent flows before adding sensory clutter. Training itself should reinforce a brief verify before following routine. In conclusion, our SafeVR study demonstrates that environmental load and crowd dynamics impose additive costs on evacuation. High sensory load degrades cue readability, while chaotic flow reduces movement predictability. Our results suggest that to build effective VR evacuation training, we must prioritize cue clarity and flow coherence over raw sensory fidelity. Thank you so much for your time and attention.